My mother-in-law thought throwing me out in the rain would be the end of my story. She stood there in her designer clothes, in her $1 million house, telling me I was nothing and that I'd always be nothing. But here's what Margaret Mitchell didn't know. I wasn't just her son's wife. I was the invisible force holding her entire world together. And I was about to let go. The rain was pouring down when I found myself standing on the sidewalk with everything I owned crammed into 2 mismatched suitcases. Behind me, the massive front door of what I thought was my home slammed shut with a finality that echoed through the entire neighborhood. Margaret's voice pierced through the storm like a dagger, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at me like I was something disgusting she'd found on the bottom of her designer shoe. "Good riddance, Sarah," she screamed, her voice carrying across the manicured lawns where curious neighbors were peeking through their blinds. "You came here with nothing, and that's exactly what you're leaving with." But Margaret had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was getting rid of a burden. But what she was really doing was unleashing the woman who had been quietly holding her entire world together. And I was about to show her exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. Let me take you back to where this whole nightmare began. Because the story you're about to hear will make you never want to underestimate the quiet ones again. I was 26 when I first laid eyes on Thomas Mitchell. Fresh out of college with a business degree, and working as a junior accountant at a small firm downtown, I was barely making ends meet in my tiny studio apartment. My parents had done their best raising me on a teacher's salary and a mechanic's wage, but they taught me something more valuable than money: resilience and the importance of earning everything you get. Thomas was different from any guy I'd ever met. He walked into the coffee shop where I spent my lunch breaks with this magnetic confidence that made everyone turn and look. Tall, with perfectly styled dark hair and a smile that could charm anyone, he seemed to glide through life effortlessly. When he accidentally bumped into my table, spilling my coffee everywhere, I expected him to just mumble an apology and walk away. Instead, he spent the next 20 minutes helping me clean up, bought me 3 different coffee options because he couldn't remember which one I'd been drinking, and somehow managed to make me laugh until my stomach hurt. "I'm Thomas," he said, extending his hand with that killer smile. "And I'm going to make this the best accident that ever happened to you." He wasn't lying. What followed was 6 months of pure magic. Thomas pursued me like I was the only woman in the world. He'd show up at my office with lunch from expensive restaurants, take me to Broadway shows I'd only dreamed of attending, and listen to me talk about my dreams of one day starting my own accounting firm with the kind of attention that made me feel like everything I said was fascinating. He told me about his childhood, growing up in the Mitchell mansion with his mother Margaret after his father died when he was 15. He painted a picture of a lonely boy who found comfort in his mother's strength, but who had always felt like something was missing. "You complete me, Sarah," he whispered one night as we walked through Central Park. "I never knew what home really felt like until I found you." When he proposed on the anniversary of our coffee shop collision, getting down on one knee right at the same table where we'd first met, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. The ring was gorgeous, a vintage diamond that had belonged to his grandmother. "Say yes," he said, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "And I promise to spend every day proving that you're the best thing that ever happened to me." I said yes without hesitation. I was head over heels in love with this man who made me feel like I could conquer the world just by being myself. But fairy tales, as I was about to learn, don't prepare you for meeting the evil stepmother. The Mitchell estate sat on 5 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the most exclusive part of town. The house itself looked like something out of a magazine, 3 stories of red brick and white columns, with windows so tall they seemed to stretch toward the sky. Inside, every surface gleamed with polish, from the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks in every room. And ruling over all of it was Margaret Mitchell. Margaret was 62 years old, but looked like she'd made a deal with the devil to stay frozen at 45. Her silver hair was always styled to perfection, her makeup never smudged, and her wardrobe consisted entirely of designer pieces that probably cost more than most people's cars. She moved through her domain like a queen inspecting her kingdom, and from the moment I stepped foot in her house, she made it clear that I was nothing more than an unwanted peasant. "So you're the little accountant," she said during our first meeting, looking me up and down like I was a stain on her Persian rug. "Thomas tells me you come from very humble beginnings." The way she said humble made it sound like a disease. I tried to make a good impression. I complimented her beautiful home, asked about the family photos lining the mantel, even brought her flowers from my own small savings. But Margaret wasn't interested in getting to know me. She was interested in establishing dominance. "These flowers are lovely, dear," she said, taking my carefully chosen bouquet and immediately handing it to the housekeeper. "Though next time you might want to choose something a little more appropriate for the quality of vase we use here." Every interaction was a small cut designed to make me bleed slowly. When I helped set the table for dinner, she'd follow behind me, moving each piece of silverware a fraction of an inch and sighing heavily. "I suppose standards are different where you grew up," she'd say with fake sweetness. When I offered to help with cooking, she'd hover over my shoulder making little clicking noises with her tongue. "Oh dear, that's not how we prepare vegetables in this family. Here, let me show you the proper way." She'd take the knife from my hands like I was a child who couldn't be trusted with sharp objects. The worst part was how she'd do it all in front of Thomas, but somehow make it seem like she was being helpful rather than cruel. "I'm just trying to help Sarah adjust to our way of life," she'd tell him with a martyr's smile. It must be so overwhelming for her, coming from such a different world. Thomas would just nod and change the subject, and I could feel my heart sinking a little more each time. Where was the man who had promised to protect me? Who had said I completed him? In his mother's house, he seemed to shrink into himself, becoming a version of Thomas the First didn't recognize. But I told myself it would get better. I told myself that love conquers all. And if I just tried harder, worked harder, gave more of myself, eventually Margaret would see that I wasn't a threat. I was just a woman who loved her son and wanted to build a family together. I had no idea that while I was breaking myself trying to win her approval, I was also building the very foundation that would ultimately destroy her. You see, about 3 months after the wedding, Thomas came to me with a request that would change everything. "Sarah, honey," he said one evening as we were getting ready for bed. "You know how good you are with numbers and all that financial stuff?" I nodded, wondering where this was going. "Well, Mom's been handling all the household finances forever, but she's getting older, and some of the online stuff is confusing her. Would you mind taking over the bill payments and account management? Just to help out." I should have seen it for what it was, a way for Margaret to maintain the illusion of control while passing off the actual work to someone else. But I was still trying to prove my worth to this family, so I said yes immediately. "Of course. I'd be happy to help with anything," I told him, genuinely excited at the chance to contribute something meaningful to our household. "You're amazing," Thomas said, kissing my forehead. "Mom will appreciate this so much. Even if she doesn't say it right away. She's just proud, you know." What I didn't know was that Margaret had been struggling with the increasingly digital world of bill paying for months. She'd grown up in an era of paper checks and phone calls, and the modern world of online banking, automatic payments, and digital subscriptions was like a foreign language to her. Rather than admit she needed help, she'd been letting Thomas believe she was still the master of the household finances while secretly feeling overwhelmed and frustrated. So when Thomas suggested that his little accountant wife take over the tedious work of actually paying bills, Margaret jumped at the chance. She could maintain her image as the powerful matriarch while someone else did the grunt work behind the scenes. The transition happened gradually. First, Thomas gave me access to the main checking account so I could handle the utilities. Then it was the mortgage payment. Then the credit card bills, the insurance payments, the property taxes. Before long, I was managing every single financial aspect of the Mitchell household. And let me tell you, it was extensive. The electric bill alone was more than my parents' entire monthly budget when I was growing up. The water bill could have fed a family for a month. The landscape maintenance, pool cleaning, housekeeping services, premium cable packages, high-speed internet, security system monitoring, wine club memberships, magazine subscriptions, streaming services for every platform imaginable. The list went on and on. Every month, I would sit at the small desk in our bedroom with my laptop and methodically work through each payment. I set up automatic transfers, scheduled recurring payments, and created a detailed spreadsheet to track every expense. I knew which day each bill was due, which accounts they came from, and exactly how much each service cost. I also started managing the more complex financial arrangements, The quarterly insurance payments, annual property tax bills, seasonal service contracts for heating and cooling, and the dozen different subscription services that kept the Mitchell lifestyle running smoothly. When the wine refrigerator needed repair, I researched companies and scheduled the service. When the security system needed upgrading, I handled the quotes and installations. Margaret loved being able to tell her friends that her household ran like clockwork, without ever mentioning that the clock was actually being wound by her despised daughter-in-law. She would hold court at her weekly bridge club, bragging about how organized and efficient her home management was, how she never missed a payment or let any service lapse. "Organization is everything," she would say, dealing cards with an air of superiority. "I simply don't understand how some people can be so careless with their responsibilities. My household runs perfectly because I maintain proper standards." Meanwhile, I was upstairs making sure those standards were actually met, scheduling the cleaning service she bragged about, paying for the landscaping she took credit for, and maintaining the pristine image she wore like a crown. Thomas appreciated what I was doing, in his own quiet way. "You make everything so easy," he'd tell me, squeezing my hand. "I don't know what we'd do without you taking care of all this stuff." But he said it like I was the hired help, not his partner. Like managing his family's entire financial life was just something I naturally did, like breathing or blinking. And Margaret? She acted like the smooth operation of her household was just the natural order of things. Like bills paid themselves and services renewed automatically through sheer force of her will. She never once acknowledged the hours I spent every month making sure her world ran seamlessly. In fact, the better I got at managing everything, the more she seemed to resent me. It was like my competence was a personal insult to her. She would make snide comments about people who spend all their time staring at computers, or young women who think they know everything about everything. But I kept doing it. Month after month, year after year. I quietly held that family's entire infrastructure together while Margaret took credit and Thomas took it for granted. I told myself that this was what marriage was: sacrifice, compromise, being the backbone even when no one sees your strength. I had no idea that I was actually building the most powerful weapon I would ever wield. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember it clearly because I had just finished paying the quarterly property taxes. A whopping $12,000 payment that I had carefully scheduled and executed from my laptop while Margaret was downstairs entertaining her book club. I could hear their laughter drifting up from the living room, and I smiled to myself thinking how nice it was that Margaret had such good friends. For a moment, I felt almost fond of her, imagining how proud she must be of the beautiful home she was sharing with her friends. That warm feeling lasted exactly as long as it took me to walk downstairs to get a glass of water. Honestly, don't know what Thomas was thinking. Margaret was saying to her friends, her voice carrying clearly through the house. "The girl is sweet enough, I suppose, but she's just so ordinary. No breeding, no class, no real substance." I froze at the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister. "And she's always hovering around with that laptop," Margaret continued with a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Playing around on the computer like she's doing something important. It's really quite sad, actually. She has no idea how a proper household actually functions." The book club ladies murmured their agreement, and I could picture them all nodding sympathetically at poor Margaret, stuck with such an inadequate daughter-in-law. "The truth is," Margaret said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for me to hear every word, "I've been carrying this entire family since Thomas's father died. The house, the finances, the social obligations, it's all on my shoulders. Thomas's little wife likes to pretend she's helping, but honestly, what could someone like her possibly understand about managing a household like this?" The blood was pounding so loud in my ears that I almost missed her final blow. "Between you and me, I think the only reason she married Thomas was for security. You can take the girl out of poverty, but you can't take the poverty out of the girl, if you know what I mean." Her friend's laughter followed me as I stumbled back upstairs, my chest tight with humiliation and rage. I locked myself in our bedroom and cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness but from sheer fury. Here I was, having just paid her property taxes with money from accounts I managed, in a house where I scheduled every service and handled every bill, listening to her tell her friends that I was a useless gold digger, who didn't contribute anything meaningful to the family. When Thomas came home that night, I was waiting for him. "We need to talk," I said, and something in my voice must have warned him because he immediately put down his briefcase and gave me his full attention. I told him everything I had heard. I explained how his mother had been taking credit for work I was doing while simultaneously undermining me to her friends. I showed him the spreadsheets I maintained, the payment schedules I had created, the accounts I managed. "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, "I have given everything to this family. I've handled every financial responsibility, managed every household system, and worked to support your mother even when she treats me like garbage. And in return, she tells her friends that I'm a worthless gold digger." Thomas looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair like a child who'd been called to the principal's office. "Sarah, you know how Mom is," he said weakly. "She doesn't mean anything by it. She's just protective of the family reputation. And she's been through a lot since Dad died." "Protective of the family reputation?" I stared at him in disbelief. "Thomas, I am family. I'm your wife. And I'm the one making sure this family's reputation doesn't crumble under a mountain of unpaid bills and canceled services." I know," he said, reaching for my hand. "You do so much for us and I appreciate it. I really do. But Mom's just set in her ways. She'll come around eventually." "When?" I demanded. "When will she come around?" "Because it's been 3 years, Thomas. 3 years of me bending over backwards, taking her insults, doing her work, and trying to prove that I'm worthy of basic respect. And instead of getting better, it's getting worse." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the conflict playing out on his face. Finally, he spoke. "Look, can you just try to be patient a little longer? I'll talk to her, okay? I'll make sure she understands how much you contribute to this family." But I could tell from the way he said it that he wouldn't actually do anything. Thomas had spent his entire adult life avoiding confrontation with his mother, and he wasn't going to start now, even for his wife. That night, lying in bed next to my husband who had once again chosen his mother's comfort over my dignity, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. I wasn't going to try anymore. The next morning, Margaret was in her usual form. I came down for breakfast to find her rearranging the flowers I had bought and placed in a vase, moving them to what she deemed a more appropriate location. "Good morning, Sarah," she said without looking at me. "I've moved these flowers to the side table. The dining room centerpiece really needs to be something more substantial." In the past, I would have apologized and asked what kind of arrangement she preferred. I would have offered to go buy different flowers or research proper dining room centerpieces. I would have bent myself into pretzel shapes trying to meet her impossible standards. Instead, I poured myself a cup of coffee and said, "Okay." Margaret paused, clearly expecting more of a response. When none came, she continued her critique. "Also, I noticed you left your laptop on the kitchen counter last night. This isn't an office, dear. We have standards about keeping work materials in appropriate spaces." I replied, taking a sip of my coffee. Margaret's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to such minimal responses from me. "I trust you'll remember that in the future," she said, her voice sharpening. "Sure," I said, grabbing a piece of toast and heading toward the door. "I'm going to work." And I left her standing there, probably wondering why her usual needling hadn't produced the desired effect. This became my new strategy. I stopped trying to win Margaret's approval and started treating her like what she had always treated me as, a roommate I barely tolerated. I was polite but distant. I didn't volunteer for extra work around the house. I didn't try to make conversation. I didn't defend myself when she made her little cutting remarks. I just existed in her space without giving her the emotional reactions she fed on. Margaret noticed the change immediately, and it made her furious. "Sarase. I hope she's not developing an attitude problem." "She seems fine to me," Thomas replied, but I could tell he was confused by my new demeanor too. "Well, I think someone needs to remind her about the importance of family harmony," Margaret continued. "A wife has certain responsibilities to maintain a pleasant household atmosphere." I looked up from my plate and smiled sweetly. "You're absolutely right, Margaret. Family harmony is so important." "I completely agree." And then I went back to eating my dinner while she sat there, clearly frustrated that she couldn't find anything specific to criticize in my response. But while I was pulling back emotionally from the household drama, I was still handling all the financial responsibilities. Every month, like clockwork, I paid every bill, managed every account, and kept the Mitchell household running smoothly. Because despite everything Margaret had put me through, I took pride in my work, and I wasn't going to let innocent service providers suffer because of family dysfunction. The bills kept getting paid. The services kept running. The house kept operating like the well-oiled machine I had built it to be. Margaret continued to take credit for the smooth operations while simultaneously escalating her attempts to get under my skin. She started making comments about my clothes, my hair, my job, my family background, anything she could think of to provoke a reaction. But I had learned something powerful. The person who cares less has all the control. The more detached I became, the more desperate Margaret grew to reassert her dominance. And that desperation was about to lead her to make the biggest mistake of her life. It happened on a Friday evening in November. Thomas was working late, and I was upstairs in our bedroom, catching up on some freelance accounting work I had started doing on the side. I could hear Margaret downstairs on the phone with one of her friends, her voice getting louder and more animated as the conversation progressed. "Telling you, Patricia, the girl has become completely impossible," she was saying. "Walking around here like she owns the place, acting like she's better than everyone else." I rolled my eyes and tried to focus on my work, but Margaret's voice kept rising. "And Thomas just lets her get away with it. I raised him better than this, but apparently marriage has made him weak. He won't stand up to her, won't put her in her place." I closed my laptop and walked to the top of the stairs, not to eavesdrop, but because I was genuinely concerned that the neighbors might hear her yelling. "No, Patricia, you don't understand," Margaret continued, her voice now carrying clearly through the entire house. "I've tried everything to make this work. I've been patient, I've been kind, I've tried to teach her proper standards. But some people just can't be helped." She paused, presumably listening to her friend's response, then launched into what would turn out to be the most expensive monologue of her life. "The truth is that this girl has been nothing but a burden from day one. She contributes absolutely nothing to this household except drama and attitude. I pay for everything, I manage everything, I maintain the standards that keep this family respectable. And what do I get in return? Disrespect and ingratitude." My hands were gripping the stair railing so tightly that my knuckles were white. "You know what, Patricia? I think it's time for some tough love. This is MY house, bought with MY late husband's money, maintained with MY efforts. And if little Miss Accountant doesn't like how things work around here, maybe she should find somewhere else to live." That was the moment. The exact second when Margaret Mitchell sealed her own fate. When Thomas came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room with a cup of tea and a calm expression that should have warned him something big was coming. "Hey honey," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "How was your day?" "Interesting," I replied. "Thomas, we need to have a serious conversation." He must have heard something in my tone because he immediately sat down and gave me his full attention. "I heard your mother on the phone tonight." I began carefully. "She was talking to Patricia about me, and she made it very clear that she considers me a burden who contributes nothing to this household. She also suggested that if I don't like how things work around here, I should find somewhere else to live." Thomas's face went pale. "Sarah, I'm sure she didn't mean." "Thomas," I interrupted, my voice perfectly steady. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer. Do you believe that I contribute nothing to this household?" "Of course not," he said immediately. "You do tons of stuff around here. The bills, the organization, all that financial stuff." "All that financial stuff," I repeated slowly. "Thomas, do you have any idea what all that financial stuff actually involves?" He looked confused. "I mean, you pay the bills and handle the accounts and stuff like that." I pulled out my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I had been maintaining for 3 years. "Thomas, come look at this." For the next hour, I walked my husband through every single aspect of his family's financial life. I showed him the dozens of accounts I managed, the hundreds of payments I processed each month, the thousands of dollars that flowed through systems I had built and maintained. I showed him the mortgage payment that I scheduled every month. $4, $200 that kept the roof over his mother's head. The property tax payments. $12,000 every quarter that kept them from losing the house entirely. The utility bills that totaled more than most people's rent. The insurance payments, service contracts, subscription services, and maintenance agreements that kept Margaret's perfect lifestyle running smoothly. My God, Thomas whispered, scrolling through the endless list of financial responsibilities. I had no idea it was this much work. Every month, I told him. For 3 years. While your mother took credit for running an efficient household. And told people I was a useless burden. Thomas was quiet for a long time, staring at the computer screen. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been respect. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew you handled some stuff, but I didn't understand the scope of it. The scope of it, I said, is that your mother's entire lifestyle depends on work that she not only doesn't appreciate but actively mocks. I'll talk to her, Thomas said firmly. I'll make her understand how important you are to this family. But I shook my head. No, Thomas. It's too late for conversations. What do you mean? I closed the laptop and looked directly into his eyes. I mean that I'm done being disrespected and taken for granted. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to start looking for my own apartment. The panic that flashed across Thomas's face was immediate and genuine. Sarah, no. You can't leave. This is your home too, is it? I asked quietly. Because your mother just spent an hour on the phone explaining to her friend that this is her house, maintained with her efforts, and that if I don't like it, I should leave. She was just upset. Thomas, I said, standing up from the couch. For 3 years, I have worked tirelessly to support this family, while your mother undermined me at every turn. And every time I've come to you about it, you've asked me to be more patient, more understanding, more accommodating. Well, I'm done. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back. You have a choice to make. You can finally stand up to your mother and demand that she treat your wife with basic respect, or you can watch me walk away. But I will not spend one more day being the invisible foundation of a household where I'm treated like an unwelcome guest. Thomas spent that entire weekend trying to change my mind. He brought me breakfast in bed, suggested couples counseling, promised that things would be different. But I could see in his eyes that he still didn't really understand what the problem was. He thought this was about hurt feelings that could be fixed with apologies and romantic gestures. He had no idea that this was about fundamental respect, and that his years of choosing his mother's comfort over his wife's dignity had done irreparable damage to our marriage. On Monday morning, I started apartment hunting. Margaret, meanwhile, seemed almost gleeful that her campaign against me was finally showing results. She floated around the house with a satisfied smile, humming to herself as she made her coffee and arranged her flowers. I heard you're looking for your own place, she commented on Tuesday morning, not bothering to hide her pleasure. I think that's a wonderful idea. Sometimes people just need to find where they truly belong. Absolutely, I agreed cheerfully. I'm so excited to find a place where my contributions are actually appreciated. Something in my tone must have registered as odd because Margaret's smile faltered slightly, but she quickly recovered. Well, I'm sure you'll be very happy, she said with fake sweetness. Independence is so important for young women. I couldn't agree more, I replied. There's nothing quite like the feeling of being in complete control of your own environment. And I walked out of the kitchen, leaving Margaret with the strangest feeling that she had just been threatened, though she couldn't quite put her finger on how. Over the next 2 weeks, I found the perfect apartment. It was a beautiful one-bedroom place in a converted brownstone about 20 minutes from downtown. High ceilings, hardwood floors, big windows that let in tons of natural light. The rent was well within my budget, especially since I had been saving money from my salary for the past year, building up an emergency fund that was about to become my freedom fund. I put down a deposit and signed a lease that would start the 1st of December. I arranged for utilities to be connected in my name. I researched furniture and started making lists of everything I would need to create my own space. For the first time in 3 years, I felt excited about my future. Thomas was getting more desperate as my move-out date approached. He tried everything from romantic dinners to expensive gifts to emotional manipulation. He even suggested we look for a house of our own, away from his mother. But it was too little too late. The damage had been done not just by Margaret's treatment, but by Thomas's consistent failure to protect me from it. I had lost respect for the man I married, and without respect, love becomes nothing more than a painful memory. "I don't understand," he said on the last Sunday evening before my move. "We can fix this, Sarah. We can make it work." "Thomas," I said gently, "love isn't enough. A marriage needs respect, partnership, and mutual support. For 3 years I gave you all of those things. But you never gave them back to me." "But I love you," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "I know you do," I replied. "But you love your comfort more. And you love avoiding conflict with your mother more. And I can't build a life with someone who loves me less than he loves his own peace of mind." Margaret, on the other hand, was practically dancing with joy as my moving day approached. She made a point of commenting on how much lighter the house felt already, how nice it would be to get back to normal, how much she was looking forward to having her home to herself and Thomas again. "I think this is really for the best," she told Thomas over dinner on my last night. "Some people just aren't cut out for this level of lifestyle. Sarah will be much happier in a place that's more suited to her." Background. Thomas looked miserable, pushing food around his plate without eating. But he still didn't say anything to defend me. I went to bed that night feeling strangely peaceful. Tomorrow I would be free. Free from Margaret's constant criticism, free from Thomas's disappointing weakness, free from pretending that I was grateful for scraps of respect from people who should have been treating me like family. I had packed everything I owned into boxes that were stacked neatly in our bedroom. I had arranged for a moving truck to come in the morning. I had said goodbye to the few friends I had made in the neighborhood, though most of them seemed relieved to avoid getting caught in the middle of family drama. What I hadn't done was make any arrangements for the dozens of bills, payments, and financial responsibilities that would suddenly have no one managing them. You see, I had been thinking very carefully about the conversation I had overheard between Margaret and her friend Patricia. Margaret had made it crystal clear that she believed she managed everything, that she was solely responsible for the smooth operation of the household, and that my contributions were essentially worthless. Well, I decided it was time to let Margaret prove just how capable she really was. The moving truck arrived at 8 a.m. sharp on December 1st. The movers were efficient and professional, loading my boxes and few pieces of furniture with practiced ease. Margaret stood in the doorway watching with obvious satisfaction, while Thomas lingered nearby looking like someone was amputating a limb. "I think this is a good opportunity for growth," Margaret announced as the movers carried out my dresser. "Sometimes we all need to learn to stand on our own 2 feet. "I couldn't agree more," I said, sliding my laptop bag onto my shoulder and taking one final look around the house I had spent 3 years maintaining. Independence is such a beautiful thing. Thomas made one last desperate attempt to change my mind. "Sarah, please. Don't do this. We can work things out." I looked at my husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, with something that might have been pity. "Thomas, you've had 3 years to work things out. You chose not to. Now you'll have to live with that choice." I walked out of that house feeling 10 pounds lighter, like I had shed some invisible weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The morning air was crisp and clean, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. My new apartment was everything I had dreamed it would be. Quiet, sunny, and completely mine. I spent the day unpacking boxes and arranging furniture, creating a space that reflected my taste, my comfort, my choices. No one criticized my decorating decisions or moved my belongings to more appropriate locations. That evening I sat on my new couch with a cup of tea and my laptop, looking out the window at my quiet street lined with trees. I felt more at peace than I had in years. And then I got to work. I opened the spreadsheet that contained 3 years' worth of carefully organized financial information for the Mitchell household. Account numbers, payment schedules, service provider contact information, renewal dates, automatic payment settings. Everything needed to keep that expensive lifestyle running smoothly. One by one, I began canceling automatic payments. The mortgage payment that was scheduled to come out of the main checking account on the 15th? Canceled. The electricity bill that was set to autopay on the 20th? Cancelled. The water, gas, internet, cable and phone services that I had carefully coordinated to maintain the house? Cancelled, cancelled, cancelled. The landscaping service that kept Margaret's gardens looking perfect for her bridge club meetings? Cancelled. The pool cleaning service that maintained the crystal clear water for her summer parties? Cancelled. The housekeeping service that came twice a week to maintain her spotless home? Cancelled. The security system monitoring that protected her valuable antiques and jewelry? Cancelled. The wine club membership that kept her cellar stocked with impressive bottles? Cancelled. Every single subscription service, from Netflix to the premium grocery delivery that ensured her pantry was always full of gourmet items? Cancelled. I worked methodically through the list, my fingers steady on the keyboard as I dismantled the entire infrastructure I had spent 3 years building. With each cancellation, I felt a little surge of satisfaction. Margaret wanted to prove she could manage everything herself? Well, now she was going to get that chance. Some of the services would lapse immediately. Others would continue until the next billing cycle, giving Margaret a few weeks to figure out what was happening and take over the payments herself. I wasn't cruel. I didn't want them to lose their house or be completely without utilities. But I also wasn't going to continue supporting a household where I had been treated like an unwelcome burden. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. I closed my laptop and leaned back on my couch, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Complete and total freedom. Margaret thought she had won by getting rid of me. But what she had actually done was eliminate the only person who knew how to keep her perfect world spinning. And she was about to find out just how much she had depended on the woman she considered worthless. The first signs started appearing within a week. Margaret called Thomas at work on Thursday, her voice tight with irritation. "The internet isn't working," she announced. "I've been trying to check my emails all morning, and nothing is loading properly." "Did you call the service provider?" Thomas asked, distracted by a meeting he was supposed to be in. "Of course I called them," Margaret snapped. "They said something about the account being inactive. It makes no sense. I've been with this company for years." Thomas felt the first flutter of unease in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. "I'm sure it's just a billing error or something. Can you handle getting it sorted out?" "I suppose I'll have to," Margaret said with the martyr tone she used when she wanted credit for handling basic adult responsibilities. But when she called the internet company back, the customer service representative was politely unhelpful. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it looks like the automatic payment for this account was canceled on December 1st, and the account has now lapsed due to non-payment. You'll need to make a payment to restore service." "That's impossible," Margaret said, her voice rising. "I never canceled anything. There must be some mistake in your system." "Let me check the account details," the representative said. After a pause, she continued. "It shows here that the cancellation was made online using the account holder's login credentials. The account is registered under the name Sarah Mitchell." Margaret's blood ran cold. "What did you say?" "The account holder is listed as Sarah Mitchell." "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "No," Margaret whispered, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "I am not." After she hung up the phone, Margaret sat in her silent kitchen, staring at the walls as the implications began to dawn on her. If Sarah had been managing the internet bill, what else had she been handling? The answer came faster than she could have imagined. On Friday, Thomas came home to find his mother standing in the dark living room, her face illuminated only by the light from her cell phone. "Mom, why are all the lights off?" he asked, flipping the switch by the front door. "Nothing happened. The electricity was shut off this afternoon," Margaret said, her voice strangely flat. "Apparently, there was an issue with the automatic payment." Thomas felt that flutter of unease turn into full-blown panic. "What kind of issue?" Margaret looked at her son, her face pale in the dim light. "Thomas, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. When you asked Sarah to help with the household finances, exactly what did you ask her to do?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, suddenly realizing that he had never actually paid attention to the details of what his wife had been managing. "I asked her to help with the bills and stuff," he said weakly. "You know, the online payments and account management. All of it." Margaret's voice was getting sharper. "Thomas, did Sarah handle all of our household finances? The truth hit Thomas like a physical blow. In his mind, he had minimized his wife's contributions, thinking of them as helping out rather than completely taking over. But now, standing in his dark house with his mother's panicked face staring at him, he realized the magnitude of what Sarah had actually been doing. "Oh God," he whispered. "Mom, I think she handled everything." Margaret's carefully constructed world began crumbling that very night. Over the weekend, service after service began failing. The water pressure dropped to a trickle, then stopped entirely when the city shut off their service for non-payment. The security system started beeping incessantly before going silent, leaving them unprotected for the first time in decades. On Monday morning, Margaret opened her front door to find her pristine lawn being destroyed by men with shovels and equipment. "Excuse me," she called out, hurrying toward them in her silk robe and slippers. "What are you doing to my garden?" "Ma'am, we're here to shut off the gas service," one of the workers replied, not pausing in his digging. "Account's been delinquent for over 2 weeks." "That's impossible," Margaret sputtered. "There must be some mistake. I've never missed a payment in my life." The worker straightened up and consulted his clipboard. "Account under the name Sarah Mitchell, ma'am. Service was canceled on December 1st, and we've been trying to reach the account holder ever since." Margaret watched in horror as they capped off her gas line, eliminating heat, hot water, and her ability to cook. The perfectly manicured lawn that had been the envy of the neighborhood now looked like a construction zone, with dirt and equipment scattered across the pristine grass. But the worst was yet to come. On Tuesday, the housekeeping service didn't show up. Margaret called them, only to be told that their contract had been canceled, and they had already filled her time slot with another client. On Wednesday, she discovered that her wine club membership had been terminated when a delivery she was expecting never arrived. On Thursday, she found out that the pool cleaning service had been canceled when she looked out her window to see the once crystal clear water turning an alarming shade of green. By Friday, Margaret Mitchell, who had spent 3 years bragging about her perfectly organized household, was living in a house with no electricity, no water, no heat, no internet, no landscaping, no cleaning service, and no idea how to fix any of it. Thomas came home that evening to find his mother sitting in the dark living room, surrounded by candles and wrapped in every blanket she could find. "Mom, this is insane," he said, pulling out his phone to use as a flashlight. "Why haven't you called these companies and gotten everything turned back on?" Margaret looked up at her son, and for the first time in his life, he saw her looking truly defeated. "I tried," she whispered. "Thomas, I've spent the entire week on the phone with customer service representatives, and they all say the same thing. The accounts were all in Sarah's name. The automatic payments were all coming from Sarah's bank account. I don't even know half of the companies that were providing services to this house." Thomas stared at his mother in disbelief. "What do you mean you don't know?" "I mean," Margaret said, her voice breaking slightly, "that your wife was handling absolutely everything, and I was too proud and too stupid to pay attention to what she was actually doing." Thomas sank into a chair, his phone light casting eerie shadows on the walls. For 3 years he had listened to his mother criticize his wife, call her useless, claim that she contributed nothing to the household. And all that time, Sarah had been the invisible force holding their entire world together. "We need to call her," Thomas said suddenly. "We need to apologize and ask her to help us sort this out." Margaret's pride flared one last time. "Absolutely not. I will not go crawling to that girl begging for help. This is her revenge, Thomas. She planned this whole thing." "Maybe she did," Thomas said, his voice getting louder. "But if she did, it's because we drove her to it. Mom, we treated her like garbage, and she was the only thing standing between us and complete chaos." Mother and son stared at each other across the dark room, both finally understanding the true scope of what they had lost when they threw Sarah out of their lives. Meanwhile, I was thriving in ways I hadn't even imagined possible. My new apartment had become a sanctuary of peace and productivity. Without the constant stress of managing someone else's household while being criticized for my efforts, I discovered that I had enormous reserves of energy and creativity that had been buried under years of emotional exhaustion. I had started taking on freelance accounting clients, building a small but growing business from my living room. The work was challenging and rewarding, and my clients actually appreciated my expertise instead of taking it for granted. I had also started dating again, something that felt terrifying and exciting at the same time. Nothing serious yet, but I was rediscovering what it felt like to have conversations with people who were genuinely interested in what I had to say, who laughed at my jokes, who treated me like an equal rather than a servant. Most importantly, I was sleeping through the night for the first time in years. No more lying awake worrying about Margaret's latest criticism, or Thomas's failure to defend me. No more walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate and prevent the next conflict. Just peaceful, restorative sleep in my own bed, in my own space, surrounded by my own choices. I had been in my apartment for 3 weeks when Thomas finally called. I was curled up on my couch with a book and a cup of tea, enjoying the quiet Saturday evening, when my phone buzzed. His name appeared on the screen, and for a moment, I considered not answering. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, Thomas," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Sarah," he said, and I could hear the desperation immediately. "Thank God you answered. We need to talk." "Do we?" I asked, taking a sip of my tea. "I think we said everything we needed to say when I moved out." "No, we didn't," Thomas said urgently. "Sarah, I know what you did. I know you canceled all the payments and services. And I know why you did it." "Do you?" I asked, genuinely curious to hear his explanation. "You wanted to show us how much we depended on you," he said. "You wanted to prove that we couldn't manage without you. And you were right. We can't." I was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. "Thomas, is that really what you think this was about? Proving a point? Wasn't it?" I set down my tea and stood up, walking to my window where I could see the streetlights twinkling in the darkness. "Thomas, when I canceled those payments, I wasn't trying to prove anything to you or your mother. I was simply stopping doing work for people who had made it clear they didn't value or appreciate that work." "But Sarah..." "Let me finish," I said firmly. "For 3 years, I managed every aspect of your family's financial life while your mother took credit for the results and called me a worthless burden behind my back. For 3 years, you allowed her to treat me with contempt while benefiting from my labor. Did you think I was going to continue providing those services after you threw me out of the house?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was small. "I never threw you out. That was Mom's decision. And you stood by and let it happen," I reminded him. "Which made it your decision too." "I know," he whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. Sarah, I'm so sorry for everything. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you from Mom's behavior. I should have appreciated everything you were doing for our family." His apology sounded genuine, but it was also 3 years too late. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "But Thomas, apologies don't undo the damage that was done. They don't give me back the years I spent trying to earn respect that should have been given freely." "I know," he said again. "But maybe we could start over? Maybe we could work on rebuilding what we lost." I looked around my peaceful apartment, at the life I was building for myself, at the future that stretched out before me full of possibilities that didn't involve managing other people's chaos or begging for basic respect. "Thomas," I said gently, "I don't want to rebuild what we lost. What we lost was broken from the beginning." "Sarah, please." "I have to go," I said. "Take care of yourself, Thomas. And take care of your mother. You two deserve each other." I hung up the phone and turned off the ringer, then went back to my book and my tea. Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in pristine white. Inside my apartment, everything was warm and quiet and mine. Thomas called 17 more times over the next week, but I didn't answer. He sent flowers to my office, which I had delivered to the elderly woman who worked in the cubicle next to mine. He showed up at my apartment building, but I had already informed the doorman that I wasn't receiving visitors. Margaret, I learned later, never tried to contact me at all. Even facing the complete collapse of her comfortable lifestyle, she was too proud to admit that she needed help from the woman she had spent 3 years demeaning. Instead, she and Thomas spent the next month living like refugees in their own home. They bought camp stoves to cook on and battery-powered lanterns to see by. They hauled water from neighbors' houses and took showers at Thomas's gym. The pool turned into a swamp, the lawn grew wild, and the house that had once been the pride of the neighborhood became a cautionary tale about taking essential workers for granted. Margaret aged 10 years in those 4 weeks. The stress of trying to navigate utility companies, service providers, and account management systems that she had never bothered to understand took a visible toll on her health and appearance. Her friends stopped visiting when it became clear that the house was no longer suitable for entertaining. The final blow came when Thomas received a foreclosure notice in the mail. Without the mortgage payments I had been managing, they were now 3 months behind, and the bank was beginning proceedings to reclaim the property. That night, Thomas made one last desperate attempt to reach me. "Sarah, I know you don't want to talk to me," he said, speaking to my voicemail in a voice raw with exhaustion. "But please just listen to this message. I'm not calling to ask you to come back. I know I don't deserve that. I'm calling to tell you that I finally understand." I was actually home when he called, sitting at my kitchen table working on invoices for my growing client base, but I let it go to voicemail. Later, after I had finished my work, I played the message. "I understand now what Mom put you through," Thomas continued. "I understand how I failed you by not protecting you from her cruelty. And I understand that you canceling those payments wasn't revenge. It was just you stopping being our unpaid servant." His voice cracked slightly. "I also understand that I've lost the best thing that ever happened to me, and that it's my own fault. I don't expect you to forgive me, Sarah. I just wanted you to know that I finally see the truth, even if it's too late." There was a long pause and I could hear him crying softly. "I hope you're happy in your new life," he said finally. "I hope someone is treating you the way I should have treated you. You deserve so much better than what you got from us." The message ended, and I sat in my quiet kitchen for a long time, feeling a complex mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the marriage that could have been, if Thomas had found his backbone 3 years earlier. Relief that I had finally escaped a situation that was slowly destroying my sense of self-worth. I never called him back. 3 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Margaret and Thomas had lost the house. They had been unable to navigate the complex process of restoring all the services I had managed, and the accumulating bills and penalties had become overwhelming. The bank foreclosed, and they were forced to sell most of Margaret's antiques and jewelry to pay off their debts. Margaret moved into a small assisted living facility, not because she needed medical care, but because it was the only housing she could afford. Thomas moved into a studio apartment across town, and took a second job to pay off the credit card debt they had accumulated while trying to maintain their lifestyle, without the financial infrastructure I had provided. The irony was not lost on me. Margaret had spent 3 years telling anyone who would listen that I was a gold digger who had married Thomas for his money. But when I left, I took nothing with me except my own belongings and my own savings. It was Margaret and Thomas who were left financially destroyed, having depended entirely on my unpaid labor to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't actually afford on their own. As for me, my life continued to improve in ways I hadn't even dared to hope for. My freelance accounting business grew steadily, and I eventually rented a small office space downtown. I hired an assistant, expanded my services, and began working with small businesses instead of just individual clients. I also met someone wonderful. His name was David, and he was everything Thomas had never been: supportive, appreciative, and strong enough to stand up for what he believed in. When I told him the story of my marriage and divorce, he listened without judgment, and then said something that made me fall in love with him on the spot. "Anyone who had you managing their entire financial life and didn't treat you like a queen is an idiot," he said simply. "But I'm grateful they were too stupid to appreciate what they had, because now I get to benefit from their loss." David appreciated my intelligence, respected my independence, and never once made me feel like my contributions were anything less than essential. When we moved in together 2 years later, he insisted on splitting all the household responsibilities equally, including the financial management that had been such a source of conflict in my first marriage. "You're my partner," he said when I offered to handle the bills. "That means we share everything. The work, the decisions, and the credit." It was a revelation to be in a relationship where I was valued as an equal rather than taken for granted as an assistant. 5 years after I walked out of the Mitchell house, I ran into Margaret at a grocery store. I was picking up ingredients for a dinner party David and I were hosting, my cart full of fresh flowers, good wine, and all the makings of a beautiful evening with friends who appreciated and respected me. Margaret was standing in the discount grocery section, carefully comparing prices on generic brands. She had aged dramatically. Her hair was thin and gray, her clothes were worn, and she moved with the careful slowness of someone whose world had become very small. She saw me before I could decide whether to acknowledge her or quietly move to another aisle. For a moment we stared at each other across the narrow space between the discount bread and marked-down produce. "Hello, Margaret," I said finally, my voice polite but distant. "Sarah," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, both of us probably thinking about everything that had led us to this encounter. I found myself studying her face, looking for some sign of the imperious woman who had made my life so miserable. Instead, I saw someone who looked defeated, diminished, and very much alone. "How are you?" I asked, and I was surprised to find that I genuinely wanted to know. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I'm..." She started, then stopped, seeming to struggle with how much truth she wanted to reveal. "I'm managing," she said finally. "And Thomas? He's..." Margaret paused again. "He's doing his best. We both are." The conversation was stilted and painful, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Margaret looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I had never seen before, genuine remorse. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology. A real one." I waited, not sure what to expect. "I was wrong about you," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "I was wrong about everything. You were never a burden or a gold digger or any of the other horrible things I said. You were holding our entire world together and I was too proud and too blind to see it." The tears were flowing freely now, and Margaret made no attempt to wipe them away. "I destroyed my son's marriage to a wonderful woman because I couldn't bear to admit that someone I considered beneath me was actually better than me in every way that mattered." I felt my own eyes welling up, not from sadness but from a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Relief maybe. Or closure. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "That means more to me than you know." Margaret nodded, seeming to understand that while forgiveness might be possible, forgetting wasn't, and our lives had moved in directions that would never intersect again. "I hope you're happy," she said as she turned to go. "I hope someone is treating you the way you deserve to be treated." "I am happy," I told her, and I meant it completely. "I hope you find some peace too, Margaret." She smiled sadly and walked away, pushing her small cart toward the checkout, and I watched her go with something that might have been pity. That evening, as David and I prepared for our dinner party, I told him about the encounter with Margaret. He listened thoughtfully while arranging the flowers I had chosen, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting me process the experience out loud. "How did it make you feel?" he asked when I finished the story. "Sad," I said after thinking about it. "But also free. Like the last piece of that chapter of my life has finally been resolved." David came over and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Margaret got exactly what she deserved," he said. "But more importantly, you got what you deserve too. A life where you're appreciated, respected, and loved for exactly who you are." I leaned into his embrace, looking around our beautiful home that we had created together as equal partners. The table was set with care, candles were waiting to be lit, and friends who valued and supported me would soon be arriving to share an evening of laughter and good conversation. Outside, I could hear the sound of children playing in the neighborhood, car doors closing as people returned home from work, the ordinary sounds of life being lived by people who, like me, had found their place in the world. Margaret had been right about one thing. I had come to her house with nothing, but she had been wrong about what that meant. I hadn't come with nothing because I was worthless. I had come with nothing because I was self-made. I had built my own value through education, hard work, and determination. And when she threw me out, I didn't leave with nothing. I left with everything that mattered. My skills, my integrity, my self-respect, and my capacity for creating something beautiful out of whatever materials life gave me. The woman who had once stood crying in Margaret Mitchell's driveway, humiliated and broken, was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more valuable than the girl who had once begged for scraps of approval from people who were never worthy of her devotion. As David and I put the finishing touches on our dinner preparations, I found myself smiling. Margaret had intended to destroy me when she threw me out of her house that night. Instead, she had given me the greatest gift possible. The chance to discover who I really was when I wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted me to be. I was Sarah Connor now, not Sarah Mitchell. And the woman I had become was someone I was genuinely proud to be. Someone who demanded respect instead of begging for it. Someone who built her own life instead of managing someone else's. Someone who knew her worth and refused to settle for less. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our first guests, and I went to answer it with David by my side. Our friends greeted us with hugs and laughter, bringing bottles of wine and stories from their week, ready to share an evening of the kind of warm companionship that makes life rich and meaningful. As we sat down to dinner, I looked around the table at these people who had chosen to be part of my life, just as I had chosen to be part of theirs. This was what family really looked like. Not people bound together by obligation and maintained by one person's unpaid labor, but people who supported each other freely, appreciated each other's contributions, and created something beautiful together through mutual respect and genuine care. Margaret Mitchell had spent 3 years trying to teach me my place. She had succeeded, just not in the way she intended. She had taught me that my place was anywhere I was valued, respected, and free to be my authentic self. And in this house, with these people, in this life I had built from nothing but determination and self-respect, I had finally found my place. The conversation flowed around the table, punctuated by laughter and the gentle clinking of glasses. David reached over and squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, feeling grateful for every step of the journey that had brought me here, even the painful parts that had taught me what I would never accept again. As the evening wound down and our friends prepared to leave, I stood in the doorway watching them walk to their cars, calling out final jokes and making plans for the next time we'd all get together. The neighborhood was quiet except for the sound of their voices echoing in the cool night air. David came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Good evening," he asked. "Perfect evening," I replied, leaning back against him. "You know what I realized tonight?" David said softly. "What's that?" "Margaret thought she was punishing you when she threw you out," he said. "But really, she was setting you free to become the person you were always meant to be." I turned in his arms to face him, seeing the love and admiration in his eyes that I had once thought I didn't deserve. "You're right," I said, standing on my toes to kiss him. She thought she was ending my story, but she was really just helping me start a new chapter. We stood there in our doorway, holding each other and looking out at the life we were building together, a life based on partnership, respect, and the kind of love that lifts people up instead of tearing them down. And somewhere across town, in a small assisted living facility, Margaret Mitchell was probably lying in her narrow bed thinking about the choices she had made and the bridges she had burned. I hoped she had found some measure of peace, but I also knew that her happiness or unhappiness was no longer my responsibility. My only responsibility now was to the life I had created, the people who valued me, and the woman I had become through surviving the worst and choosing to build something better. As David and I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I felt the deep satisfaction of a day well lived and a future full of possibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but I would meet them as the strong, independent woman I had fought to become. The girl who had once stood in the rain with her suitcases, broken and discarded, was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, demanded her respect, and refused to settle for anything less than she deserved. And that woman was going to be just fine. In fact, that woman was going to be magnificent. Hi friends, thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If Sarah's story resonated with you, if you've ever felt undervalued or taken for granted, remember this. You are worth so much more than settling for scraps of respect from people who should treasure you. Don't forget to like this video if it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the darkest moments. I'll see you in the next one, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. Bye for now.